My sister made me dress in plain clothes for the ball selection. She went mental when the hottest man chose me to be his date. Every year, the Marine Academy cadets came to our town for the annual selection ball, and every year my older sister Vanessa acted like it was her personal coronation. It was this huge tradition, older than either of us, where the cadets walked through the town square in their dress uniforms in front of the entire community and formally asked a woman to be their date for the night. Local news crews usually showed up to film it. Families lined the sidewalks with their phones out, and every girl in town under the age of 25 spent the week before rehearsing what she'd wear and how she'd stand. Vanessa had been planning for this exact day since she was 16 years old, 3 full years before either of us were even technically eligible to be chosen. She'd spent that time studying which dress colors photographed best under the string lights the town hung over the square, practicing how she'd tilt her chin the instant a cadet got close enough to notice her, and keeping an entire folder on her laptop of hairstyles she wanted to try, color-coded by how formal each one looked. She'd talk about the selection at dinner the way other people talked about college acceptance letters, like it was a milestone that would define the rest of her life. She was completely convinced that when the cadets walked through, at least 2 or 3 of them would compete for her attention, and she'd get to pick her favorite like she was choosing off a menu. And she'd already decided, months in advance, that she wanted someone tall with dark hair, someone who'd look good standing next to her in photos. The morning of the selection, she woke me up at 5:30 and made me curl her hair for 2 hours while she sipped coffee and gave directions without looking at me. She wore an emerald green dress that our parents had bought her as an early graduation present, along with heels that cost more than my entire outfit. She handed me a plain gray t-shirt and old jeans and told me to wear those instead of anything nice. When I asked why, she said she didn't want people getting confused about who the cadets were actually there for. She said it so casually, like it wasn't even a decision, more like she was stating a fact of nature. Then she added that cadets wanted women who looked like main characters, not women who looked like extras, and I should be grateful I got to stand next to her at all. We walked to the square together and found a spot near the front where the crowd was thickest, and Vanessa made sure to stand slightly in front of me so I was practically in her shadow. When the cadets marched in, the whole square went quiet, the way it always did. There were maybe 25 of them in formation, boots hitting the pavement in perfect rhythm, and leading the front row was a cadet who looked like he'd stepped out of a recruitment poster. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair cut close and blue eyes you could somehow see even from 20 feet back. Vanessa grabbed my wrist so hard her nails dug into my skin and whispered that he was the one she wanted, that she'd called it before he'd even reached us. She straightened her posture and arranged her face into the exact soft, surprised smile she'd practiced in the mirror for weeks. He walked in our direction, and Vanessa stepped forward to meet him, but he walked straight past her and stopped directly in front of me. He said his name was Grant, and he asked very formally if I would allow him the honor of being his date to the selection ball. Vanessa let out an actual gasp, loud enough that people around us turned to look, and she tried to physically insert herself between us, saying there had obviously been some kind of mix-up. Grant just stepped around her, still looking at me, patiently waiting for my answer. When I said yes, he smiled, handed me a small card with the ball details and his personal number written on the back, and gave a short nod before continuing down the line with the rest of his formation. Vanessa stood frozen in her green dress while cadet after cadet chose other women all around us. Not one of them so much as glanced her way. She didn't say a single word to me for the rest of the walk home. The moment we got through our front door, she exploded. She said I must have done something behind her back, maybe messaged him somehow before the selection, because there was no way it happened by accident. She accused me of secretly planning this for weeks while pretending I didn't even care about the ball. She said I knew exactly how long she'd been waiting for this, and that I'd deliberately taken it from her like it belonged to me in the first place. She used the word stole more than once, like Grant was an object she already owned and I'd lifted him out of her hands. She demanded that I text him immediately and cancel, tell him I was sick, tell him I had somewhere else to be, tell him anything that would get me out of it. When I told her no, she said I was a terrible sister and that plain, boring girls like me had no business going anywhere near a man who looked like Grant. She said he probably felt sorry for me, or maybe he'd lost a bet with his unit and had to pick whoever looked the most pathetic standing in the crowd. For the next 2 days, she barely spoke to me directly, but she texted basically everyone we knew, telling them I'd betrayed her and had apparently been scheming this for weeks. Then she did something I never expected. While I was in the shower one evening, she picked up my phone, which I'd left charging on my dresser, and texted Grant pretending to be me. She told him I'd changed my mind, that I only said yes to be polite, and that I wasn't actually interested in dating anyone in the military. Then she deleted the whole conversation, so there'd be no trace of it. When Grant didn't reach out for 3 days straight, I assumed he'd simply lost interest, until one of his fellow cadets messaged me out of nowhere, asking why I'd been so cold when I turned Grant down. That's when I found out what my own sister had done. I called Grant immediately and explained everything, and he sounded relieved rather than annoyed because he told me he'd actually been nervous the whole week, hoping I'd say yes in the first place. He said he'd first noticed me months earlier volunteering at the community center near base, helping run a reading program for younger kids, and that was the reason he specifically requested our town for the selection walk. We made new plans for the ball together, and I decided not to tell Vanessa I'd fixed things. Instead, Instead, I let her believe Grant had never texted me back, that I'd been sitting home embarrassed the whole time. She actually cheered up when she heard that, telling me she knew all along he never really wanted someone like me. On the night of the ball, Vanessa stayed home on the couch with a blanket and a carton of ice cream, fully convinced I was upstairs in my room sulking. I was actually at the ball wearing a deep red dress our cousin had lent me for the night, dancing with Grant, who turned out to be sharper and funnier than I expected, cracking dry jokes about Barrick's life between songs. I got home a little after 11, still feeling like I was floating somewhere above the sidewalk. My feet ached in the borrowed heels, and there were tiny flecks of confetti from the ballroom decorations caught in my hair, but none of it bothered me. I let myself in quietly and found Vanessa exactly where I'd left her, pajamas on, blanket over her legs, watching some rom-com with tissues piled on the coffee table, like she'd been having a whole emotional evening on my behalf. She looked up and asked, in this syrupy, fake caring voice, how my night of moping had gone. I clutched my little clutch purse behind my back, the one holding my phone and Grant's card with his number on it, and told her it was fine, that I just watched something on my laptop, and that I already knew I'd get over it eventually. She turned back to the television and said that guys like that never actually wanted girls like us anyway, that the whole formal ask tradition was just something cadets were required to do. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and stood there with my heart still racing. The red dress was hidden in the trunk of my car, where I'd changed out of it in the driveway before walking inside. I sat on my bed and checked my phone, and Grant had already texted twice asking if I made it home safe and telling me he'd had an amazing night. I smiled at the screen and typed back a reply, then shoved the phone under my pillow the second I heard Vanessa's footsteps in the hallway. The following weeks were strange. Grant and I texted constantly, but I had to hide it like I was doing something wrong. He wanted to take me out properly, to dinner, or just to walk around downtown, but I kept inventing excuses, terrified someone would mention it around Vanessa. We finally agreed to meet for coffee at a small shop across town that neither of us had any real connection to, somewhere mostly full of retirees and office workers on lunch breaks. I got there early and took the corner booth in the back where nobody passing by the windows could see me. Grant showed up 10 minutes later, out of uniform, in a plain button-up and jeans, and slid into the booth across from me with a small smile. He reached for my hand across the table, and I pulled back instinctively, glancing toward the door. Sorry, I told him. I'm just being careful. We talked for a while about nothing important, his training schedule, my part-time job at the bookstore, until he got quiet and looked at me directly. Can I ask you something? He said, stirring his coffee. Why are we meeting across town like we're hiding an affair? I want to actually take you out on real dates, where we don't have to be careful about who sees us. So I told him everything. The message Vanessa sent pretending to be me, the way she deleted it to cover her tracks, the way I'd let her believe he never texted back so she wouldn't spiral. I told him I hadn't told her yet that I went to the ball at all, that she still thought I spent the whole night home in my room. Grant listened without touching his coffee, letting it go cold in front of him. That's really messed up, he finally said. What she did with your phone, that's not something a sister does. I know, I said, picking at a napkin, but if I tell her now that I went, and that we're actually seeing each other, she's going to lose it completely. We live in the same house. We share basically the same friend group. He was quiet for a second. So you're just going to keep hiding this? For how long? I don't know, I admitted, until I figure out what to do. He reached for my hand again, and this time I let him take it. I get it, he said. Toxic family dynamics are hard to walk away from. I had a cousin growing up who was exactly like that, always competing, always finding some way to make me feel small. But here's the thing, you're letting her control your life even though she probably doesn't even realize she's doing it. You're sneaking around and hiding, and that's not fair to you. And honestly, it's not fair to me either. That landed harder than I expected. He was right. I was still letting Vanessa dictate what I could and couldn't do, exactly the way I had for years. About a week after the ball, Grant texted me saying his older brother was coming through town for the day. His name was Derek, 2 years older, worked as a paramedic, and was staying overnight before heading back out. Grant really wanted us to meet and suggested lunch at a diner near the base. I almost said no, since the diner sat right in the middle of everyone's regular lunch spots, but something in the way he asked made me agree anyway. I met the two of them at noon. Derek had the same blue eyes as Grant, though his hair was lighter and he carried himself with the easy, unhurried confidence of someone whose job involved staying calm while other people panicked. He hugged me hello like we'd known each other for years already, told me Grant had shown him a picture from the ball on the drive over, and said I looked exactly like he'd expected, whatever that meant. We ordered food and sat by the window, and I kept glancing toward the door out of habit, half expecting to see Vanessa or one of our mutual friends walk in and catch me sitting there in the open, in public, with the exact person I was supposed to be hiding. So, you two had a good time at the ball, Derek said, grinning at his brother over a bite of his sandwich. He wouldn't stop talking about you for weeks leading up to it. Really, I said, looking at Grant, who shrugged with an embarrassed little smile. I told him about the reading program at the community center, Grant admitted. I'd noticed her there a while before the selection. Derek asked easy, comfortable questions about my classes and what I wanted to do after graduation, the kind of questions that made conversation feel effortless. Then he noticed me checking the door again. You okay? He asked. You seem on edge. So I explained the whole Vanessa situation from the start. Derek's expression shifted as I talked, moving from curious to concerned to something closer to angry. Let me get this straight, he said once I finished. She made you dress down so you wouldn't take attention away from her. Then, when a guy picked you anyway, she sabotaged you behind your back, and you're still protecting her feelings about it. When he said it out loud like that, it sounded almost absurd. I know it's complicated, I said. It's really not, Derek said, setting down his fork. Real family doesn't spend years trying to make you feel smaller so they can feel bigger, and sometimes the mess just clears itself out. You don't have to force it. Grant nodded along, and I sat there feeling like they'd both just said something obvious that I'd been refusing to look at directly. We finished lunch and walked out together, and that's when I ran straight into Theo from my chemistry class, standing outside with his girlfriend Danielle. Hey, Theo said, breaking into a grin when he saw me. You looked incredible at the ball. Didn't realize you and Grant were together now. My stomach dropped instantly. I could feel both Grant and Derek watching to see what I'd say. Danielle nodded enthusiastically, saying something about how good we looked, dancing together. Thanks, I managed. Would you maybe not mention it around, though? It's kind of private right now. Theo looked confused. Why would it be private? Everyone thought you two looked amazing. Half the ball was talking about it. I just asked that he keep it quiet for now, and he shrugged and agreed, though he mentioned offhand that photos were already floating around online anyway. They headed off, and I stood there feeling sick to my stomach. Grant touched my arm gently and said it was going to come out eventually, whether I was ready or not. I knew, I just wasn't ready yet. 2 days later, I was sitting in a chemistry lecture, barely following along, when my phone started buzzing over and over in my bag. I ignored it at first, but the buzzing kept coming in waves. I finally pulled it out under the desk and saw 14 messages from Vanessa. My hands started shaking as I opened them. The first one just said, "Are you kidding me right now?" The second was a screenshot from an Instagram post, a group photo from the ball where I was clearly visible in the background in my red dress, Grant's arm around my waist, both of us laughing at something off camera, both of us tagged by name. The next several messages got angrier with every line, each one arriving before I'd even finished reading the last. She asked why I lied to her. She called me manipulative. She said she couldn't believe I'd do this to her after everything she'd apparently sacrificed for me over the years, though she never once specified what any of that sacrifice actually was. One message was just 3 question marks, sent alone. Another was a voice memo I didn't dare play in the middle of a lecture hall. The last text just said we needed to talk the second I got home. No punctuation, no explanation, just the kind of flat final sentence that made my stomach drop before I even walked through the door. I could barely focus for the rest of class, staring at my phone under the desk while the professor's voice turned into background noise. By the time class let out, there were more than 20 messages waiting. I took the long way home, in no rush to get there, already knowing exactly what was coming. Vanessa was standing in the living room with her arms crossed the second I walked in, her face red, her eyes wild. "Why did you lie to me?" she said, not even bothering with hello. "You went to the ball, you went with him, and you let me believe you spent the whole night up here feeling sorry for yourself." I tried to explain, told her about the message she'd sent from my phone, about fixing things with Grant afterward, about how scared I'd been of exactly this reaction. But she talked over me before I could finish a sentence. "You deliberately humiliated me," she said. "You snuck around behind my back and made me look ridiculous in front of everyone who heard the real story. Do you understand how many people saw you there and then heard me telling everyone he never wanted you? You're the one who used my phone," I said, my voice getting louder. "You sabotaged me first. You stole that from me." She was yelling now. "You knew how long I'd been waiting for that day. You knew, and you just took it anyway." "I didn't take anything," I said. "He chose me. That's not something you can steal from someone." The argument stretched on for what felt like 20 minutes straight, her voice climbing higher every time I tried to get a word in, insisting I'd been plotting this since before the selection even happened, that I must have contacted him ahead of time to arrange the whole thing behind her back. She brought up things from years earlier that had nothing to do with any of this. A birthday party she claimed I'd ruined, a boyfriend of hers I supposedly flirted with in middle school, stacking every old grievance on top of the new one like she was building a case file. She called me sneaky and dishonest and said I'd been pretending to support her while working against her the entire time, that this was who I'd always secretly been underneath, and she'd just been too trusting to see it sooner. I tried to stay level, but eventually I lost my patience completely. "You sabotaged me first," I said again. "You used my phone and told him I didn't want him, and you deleted it so I'd never find out. And you've spent years chipping away at my confidence, calling me the boring one, the extra, like I should be grateful you even let me stand next to you." Vanessa went completely still. For a solid 10 seconds, she just stared at me, and then her whole expression turned cold. "You're delusional if you think he actually likes you," she said. "He probably felt bad for the sad girl in the plain shirt. Or maybe his unit dared him to pick the least impressive girl in the crowd. Who knows?" Something inside me finally cracked, but not the way it usually did when she said things like that. This time, instead of hurt, all I felt was clarity. I could suddenly see the whole pattern laid out clean and simple. Years of small comments meant to keep me exactly where she wanted me. Years of her positioning herself as the main event while I was supposed to accept being background noise. "I'm done," I told her. "I'm done letting you make me feel like less than nothing. This isn't what family is supposed to look like." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You'll be back," she said. "You always come crawling back, because without me, you're nobody." I walked to my room and shut the door, and I could hear her moving around the living room, slamming cabinets, throwing something onto the couch. Then my phone started buzzing again, and I opened it to find she'd already posted a long, detailed story online about how I'd betrayed her by secretly going to the ball behind her back after she'd been so supportive about Grant choosing me. She left out every part where she'd sabotaged me first, painting herself as the victim of my cruelty. My notifications exploded within minutes. People asking what actually happened. People picking sides, some believing her, some messaging me directly for my version. Sitting there watching the messages pile up, I realized she was forcing my hand completely. I could either speak up for myself or let her version become the only one anyone remembered. I sat on my bed with my phone until almost 3 in the morning, the notifications never fully stopping, my group chats splitting into camps in real time while I watched. I opened a blank post and started typing, deleting and rewriting entire paragraphs, trying to explain everything without sounding cruel or like I was trying to destroy her the way she'd tried to destroy me. I wrote one version that was too angry and deleted it in full. I wrote another that sounded so careful and apologetic, it barely explained anything at all, and deleted that too. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I stopped trying to make it sound good and just started writing down what actually happened, in order, without any of the softening. Around 4, I finally landed on something that felt honest and fair. I laid out how she'd used my phone to message Grant while I was in the shower, how she'd deleted the conversation to hide it, how she'd spent years calling me the extra, the boring one, telling me I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. I attached a screenshot proving the timestamp of the fake message lined up exactly with when I was showering. Nothing dramatic, just facts laid out plainly. I read it over a dozen times before finally posting it around 5 in the morning, then turned my phone face down and tried to sleep. When I woke up a few hours later, my notifications had exploded again. Some people were shocked that Vanessa would go that far, saying they couldn't believe a sister would do something like that. A few people said I still shouldn't have hidden the ball from her regardless, that hiding it made me just as bad. One girl I barely knew left a long comment about how the whole situation sounded exhausting, and we both needed to talk to someone. My phone rang that afternoon and Grant's name popped up on the screen. He'd seen everything online and sounded more angry than I expected, though clearly not at me. He asked why I'd never told him about the years of comments before all of this, and I admitted I'd gotten so used to hearing them that I didn't even register them as insults anymore. They just felt like background noise. He told me about a cousin of his from childhood who'd competed with him over everything imaginable, and how it took him years after growing up to realize real family doesn't make you feel like you're constantly losing some invisible competition. We talked for well over an hour about toxic family dynamics and why people stay stuck in them long after they should have walked away. That evening, someone knocked on my door, and I opened it expecting Vanessa but found Tobias from 2 doors down instead, a guy I was friendly with but never particularly close to. He asked if he could come in for a minute, and I stepped aside. He sat backward on my desk chair and told me he was glad I'd finally stood up to her. And when I looked surprised, he laughed and admitted he'd been watching the dynamic between us for years without saying anything. He said he'd noticed how she always positioned herself as the main attraction and made these small comments designed to keep me from ever feeling confident. He offered to back me up if I ever needed a witness for anything. I thanked him, feeling oddly grateful, since I usually kept to myself and had no idea anyone outside the house had picked up on any of it. The weeks that followed were exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with schoolwork or sleep and everything to do with constantly bracing for the next thing. Our shared friend group split cleanly down the middle, some siding fully with Vanessa and going cold on me overnight, unfollowing me without a word, others deciding the phone sabotage was worse than anything I'd done and choosing to sit with me instead at lunch, at parties, in the group chats that had quietly renamed themselves without her in them. Most people seemed simply tired of the whole thing and avoided both of us equally, which somehow stung in its own separate way. I lost a couple of friends I'd had since middle school who believed her version completely and never once asked for mine, but I also grew closer to people like Tobias, who told me flatly they'd always suspected something was off about how Vanessa treated me, and who started saving me a seat without ever making it a whole conversation about it. Living in the same house became almost unbearable. We barely spoke unless absolutely necessary. She made pointed comments about fake loyalty whenever I passed through a room. She left her dishes piled in the sink for days, knowing exactly how much it bothered me. I started spending most of my time at the library or over at Grant's place just to avoid being home. Grant invited me to a base event 3 weeks after everything blew up. Some casual gathering on the lawn behind the barracks with grills going and someone's portable speaker playing music too loud, and I was nervous the whole drive over about meeting more people who might have already heard some version of the drama online. But when we arrived, everyone was warm and welcoming, treating me like I simply belonged there, handing me a plate before I'd even said my name to half the room. Grant introduced me to Harper, one of his closest friends from training, whose date mentioned, almost in passing, that Grant had been talking about me for weeks before the selection even happened, that he'd been genuinely worried the whole time that I might say no when he finally got the chance to ask. Being around people who didn't know the whole Vanessa saga and simply saw me as Grant's girlfriend felt like a breath of fresh air after weeks of feeling like a headline. Nobody was judging or picking sides, they just accepted me as part of the group, asked normal questions, laughed at normal jokes, and for a few hours I forgot to check my phone at all. One morning, I was making coffee in the kitchen when Vanessa walked in. We'd been avoiding each other for nearly 3 weeks, and the sudden closeness made me tense immediately. She stood there for a moment and said we needed to talk like adults. I agreed cautiously and turned to face her. She said she'd been thinking things over and was sorry for using my phone. My hope lifted for a second until she immediately added that I still shouldn't have hidden the ball from her the way I did. She said we both made mistakes, but mine was worse because it was intentional deception. I realized this was as close to an apology as she was capable of giving, one that still managed to make everything partly my fault. I took a breath and told her I appreciated the partial apology, but I couldn't go back to a relationship where she needed me smaller so she could feel bigger. I told her the years of comments about being the extra, the background one, had genuinely damaged how I saw myself, whether she meant them that way or not. She looked at me like she genuinely had no idea what I was talking about, insisting she'd just been honest about our different roles, that some people were naturally more outgoing while others were better suited to supporting roles, and that families needed both kinds to function. She said I was being oversensitive and reading too much into what she considered normal observations, the kind any older sister might make. That confirmed everything I already suspected walking into the conversation. She fundamentally did not understand how her words had shaped me over the years, piece by piece, and she probably never would, not because she was incapable of understanding, but because understanding would have meant admitting she'd built her entire sense of herself on standing slightly above me. We agreed to be civil under the same roof for the time being. No more pointed comments, no more public posts, just quiet, careful coexistence until I could move out. It wasn't the reconciliation some people in our lives clearly wanted for us, the tearful hug, the clean ending, but it was livable, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. I picked up my coffee, walked past her without waiting for a response, and went upstairs to text Grant that I was free for the rest of the day.